From video switchers, graphics, and routing, whether SDI, IP, or even in the cloud, Ross makes live production easy. Trusted everywhere from the biggest sports stadiums to city council meetings, newsrooms, and more. Are you ready to upgrade your workflow? Keycode Media offers the best Ross video pricing and a free consultation, so you get the right products the first time. Trust the experts at Keycode Media and book today at keycodemedia.com. Have you ever watched a production and thought, wow, that lighting is perfect, but then the host stares into the void like they forgot how to read? Yeah, that's because they didn't use iCan. See, iCan makes top-tier studio lighting, prompters, and gear that keep productions looking and running smooth. So whether you need buttery soft LED lights or rock-solid teleprompters so you don't forget your lines, or just pro-level gear that won't let you down, iCan has you covered. So if you want your production to look like $1 million without spending $1 million, check out iCan. Because great lighting and a good prompter can make anyone look like a pro.
Three, two, red, one.
Let's face it, creative teams are much more distributed than ever before. Editors are in different cities. Freelancers are working from various types of laptops. Reviewers spread time across departments and time zones. And yet, many creative systems are still designed like everyone still sits in the same building. Folks, your disconnect is starting to show. Media gets duplicated. Reviews slow down. Security becomes harder and harder to manage. And as content volume grows, teams spend more time fighting workflows than just creating. And that's why I'm absolutely thrilled that today we're doing this episode, because today on Broadcast to Post, we're breaking down what it actually takes to support multi-site creative teams without sacrificing too much speed, quality, or control. We'll start with our usual key considerations segment, which is focused on the must-have technology stack for collaborative editing and creative work across multiple locations. We'll also cover shared storage, asset management, review and approve, file streaming, and the tools that teams rely on to scale without too much chaos. Because where's the fun without a little bit of chaos? We'll then hear from two guests working at very different ends of the creative spectrum. First, we'll have Danielle DeStefano, CTO at ITV America, the producers of Love Island USA, and she'll share how large-scale television productions like Love Island move massive amounts of footage from remote shoots into centralized post environments, where their speed is absolutely insane due to the quick turnaround of the show. And we'll have our favorite, Matt Stamos from Keycode Media, who'll bring us his corporate perspective, drawing from his work with distributive, creative, and marketing teams, using hybrid and cloud workflows to support multiple departments, freelancers, and product lines. If you're a creative in a multi-site team, or your team supports content creation across more than just one location, then this episode is for you. When creative teams go multi-site, the biggest mistake is building your tech stack like a junk drawer. A shared drive here, a review tool there, a cloud subscription added at 11:47 p.m. when something breaks. See, high-performing teams don't think in tools, they think in layers, and each layer has a job. Together, they form a system that lets people work from anywhere without turning production into a slow-motion incident report. Let's walk through the core technology layers that multi-site creative teams actually need, with real-world examples of how teams are doing this right now. First, shared storage is the backbone, and it's non-negotiable. If your media isn't centralized, nothing else works reliably. Because the moment storage is kind of shared, you get editors working from copies, versions drifting like continents, and storage costs quietly multiplying like rabbits. For many professional teams, the backbone is still high-performance shared storage, because video workflows aren't impressed by wishful thinking. Solutions like EditShare and SNS are common because they're built for multi-user editorial and high-bandwidth video. On-prem, multi-location hybrid, the deployment varies, but the standard doesn't. One source of truth, multiple editors, same pool of storage, and performance you can count on. Shared storage isn't glamorous, believe you me, and that's fine. Foundations aren't supposed to be glamorous. They're supposed to not move. Now, once everything lives in one place, the next problem is nobody can find anything. And that's where we find asset management, media asset management. Find it, reuse it, stop remaking it. Here's the trap. Centralizing media doesn't automatically make it usable. As libraries grow, teams hit the point where they're recreating content because they can't locate what already exists. That's not creativity, that's amnesia with a budget. This is where media asset management, or as we call it MAM, earns its keep. Tools like Iconic, IPV, and EMAM put a searchable, metadata-driven layer on top of storage so editors, producers, and marketers can search across years of content. They can preview without downloading the huge file and reuse footage across regions and campaigns. And once you enrich your content with AI searches, there's no getting away from the fact that you need a way to sift through this ginormous amount of search results. For multi-site teams, MAM isn't a nice to have. It's how you keep the org from becoming a content factory that forgets it already built the product. Now that people can find the media, we need them to approve that media without generating 12 exports to get just one comment. Which brings us to review and approve, kill the export spiral. So we have a rule. Review should happen in the workflow, not around it. In distributed environments, review often becomes the bottleneck because the process is usually export early, send links in email, chat, or some other instant messaging service, wait and collect feedback in 5 different formats, and the editor becomes the human comment translator. Modern review tools fix this by keeping review inside the system. Platforms like EditShare Flow with Media Silo and Iconic or IPV can handle frame-accurate commenting, version tracking, and approvals without forcing editors into an endless export duty. The payoff is pretty simple. Centralized feedback, faster feedback loops, fewer misunderstandings, and much fewer "I thought you meant the other version" disasters. Great, you now can review cleanly. But if your metadata is manual, you're about to start drowning as your volume scales. Because AI metadata helps you scale without hiring a tagging army. Quick reality check. Manual metadata doesn't scale. It just fails slowly until it fails loudly. AI-driven metadata is where teams stop treating large libraries like your kitchen junk drawer and start treating them like inventory. With solutions like DataCore or Pixit Media's AI Plus and Scalologic's Carol 1, you can automatically transcribe dialogue, or speech-to-text as we call it, identify faces, objects, scenes, and sentiments, generate tags and descriptions for legacy MAMs, and improve your search beyond keywords by using subjective semantic understanding. For multi-site teams, this matters because it reduces reliance on tribal knowledge, while at the same time improving the discovery of unknown moments in your assets. Okay, people can now find content. Now the question becomes, how do they work with it from anywhere without dragging full-res files across the internet? That's where file streaming comes into place. They allow you to edit from anywhere without downloading the universe. Another non-negotiable. Remote editing shouldn't require moving petabytes like it's 2009. Not every editor needs direct access to on-prem storage or remote workstation. File streaming changes the model. You work locally, but only pull down what you need. Platforms like LucidLink or Suite Studios, or even FastCache from Facilis, allows editors to work on less expensive computers, stream only the required media, and avoid downloading full-res everything just in case. This is especially effective for freelancers and remote contributors. You get flexibility without turning collaboration into a logistics problem. And since freelancers aren't going away, you need a strategy that doesn't collapse every time you onboard a new one. Which brings us to our next point: freelancer laptops. Standardize or suffer. Another rule for you: freelancers are not a temporary exception. They're part of the operating model. So stop onboarding freelancers like it's a one-off miracle each time. Multi-site teams that scale cleanly typically standardize laptop-based editing with a clear plan. defined hardware and software profiles, secure access, and that includes access to shared storage, streaming, or remote tools, and controlled permissions and limited local storage. However you connect them, streaming, remote access, hybrid workflows, the point is consistency. Consistency keeps support manageable and security intact. Chaos is expensive. It just invoices you later. Now, let's zoom out a little bit. Once you have lots of people working in lots of places, the real risk becomes coordination, not capability. That brings us to project orchestration, so you can control the chaos at scale. Here's the common trap. As teams grow, the work doesn't fail because editors can't edit. It fails because projects get messy. Folder structures drift. Permissions get really weird. People build their own system that works for them. And suddenly your pipeline is held together by hope and Slack messages. In Adobe-heavy environments, for example, tools like Teams or Productions or group-based project preferences can get you started. Adding solutions like Projective Strawberry can also help large teams stay organized by standardizing project structures, managing permissions and workflows, and integrating directly into Adobe Creative Cloud apps. This orchestration layer reduces errors and gives leadership visibility across dozens of projects and contributors, which is exactly what multi-site operations need once the headcount goes up and the tolerance for surprises goes down. Multi-site creative teams aren't a future trend. They're the default now. The teams that win don't buy more tools to add complexity. They invest in the right foundation to remove friction. And that's the real Stack, a layered system that lets creative teams collaborate, scale, and deliver from anywhere, without production turning into a daily scavenger hunt. Today, we're joined by two guests who work with multi-site creative teams, but at very different scales. First, we have Danielle DeStefano, and she's the CTO at ITV, where she oversees the technology behind large-scale television production and post-production, including reality programming like Love Island. Her teams move massive volumes of footage from remote production locations into centralized post environments, where speed and reliability are critical. And we're also joined by our very own Matt Stamos from Keycode Media. And Matt here works at the corporate creative and marketing teams that are scaling content production across multiple locations, departments, and product lines. He helps design hybrid workflows that support asset management, remote collaboration, and large freelance teams. Together, these two bring a broadcast and corporate perspective on what it takes to run multi-site creative teams successfully. Thank you both for being with us here today.
Hi, Michael. Thank you.
So let's start with what multi-site really means today. So Danielle, we'll start with you. When people hear multi-site creative teams, they often think remote work, right? In your world, what does multi-site actually mean from a production as well as post-production perspective?
There are different ways that we look at multi-site productions. There's, ENG, field shooting, and getting media back into post. Obviously, in this post-COVID world, everyone is pretty much remote for the most part. And so no matter where we're shooting, we're having the media come back and everyone is remote that's accessing it. And then we also have global productions that we do, such as Love Island, where we film in Fiji, but we edit on location there. And then we've also shot and edited in other countries and had the media come back and edit all over the world. So you name it, we've tried it at least, and we're attempting to do it because, everything now just needs to be flexible.
And Matt, when corporate teams come to you and they say, look, Matt, we're now multi-site, what's usually happening behind the scenes that's kind of forced that shift?
It's similar to what Danielle is talking about. It's different requirements for different use cases. So they may be shooting remotely or using external third-party production companies or utilizing freelancers, or they just straight up have different creative offices throughout the world. So it really kind of depends on the customer and what their use cases are. But we see a lot of what, like, for example, Danielle is saying, where the use cases change based on the type of creative work, whether that's sort of unscripted versus scripted versus sports versus marketing or sales enablement material. So it definitely changes on the type of content and the type of organization.
Thank you. Thank you for breaking that down from both of you. If we shift gears a little bit and we talk about speed as kind of the design constraint when we're developing these workflows, Danielle, speed obviously is everything in reality television, from camera to editor to delivery. What does speed actually look like in practice for a show like Love Island?
Well, for us, I think it starts with finding the right partners. I mean, ultimately, you need people that are going to understand that you are on call 24/7. There is media coming in 24/7. We never stop filming. And, we have some really great partners that we work with on site in Fiji and all over the world that help us, put all of the puzzle pieces together. And they have to work together because ultimately, we need to make sure that if there is a problem along the chain of events that, we can solve it very quickly. So to me, speed is not only, obviously it costs money and you need to have the right connectivity, but you really have to have the right partners.
I'd like to get a little pull on that thread a little bit. Aside from just partners, what technical or workflow decisions have the biggest impact on how quickly footage gets from a remote shoot like Fiji into the hands of the post team?
I mean, really, it comes down to whether we're shooting HD or UHD. That's the big difference there. Whether it's SDR or HDR does not really matter in terms of offline editorial. But if you're talking about shooting 24/7 and, for Love Island, I think there's like 80 or 90 cameras, but you're only recording 16 cameras at a time. And then you have a bunch of ENG cameras. So maybe you're bringing in 20, 25 cameras at once. HD to UHD, that's a huge jump in terms of footage. So for that show, it's HD. We've talked about and looked at doing a show of that scale in UHD, and it is a much bigger undertaking due to the size and the volume.
And just for a little bit more information, and proxies aren't something that can kind of work around that by generating low res but high resolution or high raster, large raster for proxies. Is that something that can't adapt in an environment like that?
Yeah, that's actually true. Is basically if you had longer production cycles or post-production cycles, yes, we would definitely be working in an HD proxy. But for a show like Love Island, it's quick turn. And so you are editing within 16 to 18 hours and airing 24 hours later. There's no time for that. It doesn't make sense. So everything on site is connected via 10 gig and the media all comes in on site. Even when they go out and do remote like dates on a boat or a yacht, that stuff all comes back on site and gets processed with a post vendor that helps us make Avid media straight from the cards and from the robocams coming in, from the feeds coming in. Now, if the show had more lead time and a normal production schedule, yes, that's exactly it. We would make HD proxies work in HD. We've actually started transitioning a bit from Avid to Premiere that can handle a bit more of like the HD workflow. And we are still doing primarily Avid for our big shows, but like not for Love Island. Love Island's Avid, but for some other smaller shows where we just need to get footage in fast from the field.
Thank you for that extra information. And Matt, if we pivot to kind of corporate environments, speed is often framed a little bit differently. So what does speed mean for the teams you work with, and where do they usually lose the most time?
Yeah, speed is interesting. Sometimes it's what I could sort of refer to. There's sort of live where you just go into air, but then when there's a post workflow involved, it's sort of there's two speed bumps. It's sort of camera to timeline and then timeline to distribution or platform air, right? So there's different little sort of speed bumps. We run into a similar scenario where if there's a short turnaround, there isn't really time for proxies. But if there is a longer turnaround, those proxies are really useful, especially for review and approval. And then it also depends on the sort of finishing stage. If you get into more theatrical releases and higher end film production, there tends to be more emphasis on the color, the audio sweetening. And so there's sometimes a bump in there, but sort of traditional corporate work, we just sort of see that timeline bump and then that last sort of final approval bump before it goes to it's like I sometimes like to say the final eyeballs, right? Where before it goes and sees public eyeballs.
Let's move a little bit towards the organizational part of media, which I know that's not why people get up in the morning, but it's a very important process, especially when you're working with immense amount of data, catalogs, and as you mentioned, working with a multitude of cameras that are running almost 24/7. So Danielle, with multi-camera shoots and constant coverage, how critical is having a clear source of truth for media in a multi-site environment like yours?
It is the most important thing. I think no matter what, but when you have a smaller team or you're doing like a one-off project with one editor, one producer, you can be disorganized if you want to be, but when you're dealing with a team of 80, 90, 100 people accessing the same footage and needing it immediately. I've worked at the Olympics for NBC for many years, and Love Island is like the reality TV, the Olympics of reality TV. It is like there is just crews working 24/7 shifts. Everyone needs the same media. The social team needs the media. So we're pretty locked down with our organization. And I think, the key to that is just having really, really good AEs that understand that their job is to keep everything else moving and to like support producers, editors, social, whoever needs access to that footage.
And is that typically done via an asset management system, or because of the tight turnaround, are we looking at folder structure, file structure, naming conventions, and things of that nature?
Yeah, just basically we used to use an asset management system and we moved away from it, and we work with a vendor now who helps us make the Avid media, and we just organize it in a way. Again, it's all full res. We have a deletion kind of process where we keep two nearline copies, and then we are, deleting the Avid media after X number of days if we don't need it, and we consolidate. So there's like a full media management ecosystem within the ecosystem. And we have dedicated assistant editors. Their job is to make sure that that keeps moving along, and then that we have what we need when we need to leave the island. Because inevitably we end up needing to cut a spinoff show or a promo or, fix an evergreen master or something. So a lot happens in Fiji, and then we have to be able to leave the island with all the right media in the right places and check it before we leave.
Now, Matt, on kind of your side of the house, obviously you'd see a lot of duplication and version confusions with corporate teams. Why does that happen so often once teams go multi-site?
Well, I think that a lot of times it goes back to access to the high res. So unless they're doing a remote conform and they've got remote editors, say in New York and LA, whoever's conforming is going to have access to that high res. I always sort of joke, it's like duplicates are okay as long as they're intentional, right? So if you know you have duplicates or you created them for a reason, and then you have the mechanism to delete them and make sure that you keep an appropriate copy on your appropriate storage, it's fine. But a lot of times it boils down to access to high res and where conform happens. I do see that, and I kind of want to touch on this, that the file and folder structure is really important. But what we're finding is when people do have the luxury of the time and they can deploy a MAM system, a properly deployed MAM system lets customers sort of rely less on that file and folder structure. It's still less important for keeping your storage organized, but for searching and collaboration and the ability to make collections or projects more portable, a MAM does really do a great job of letting you think beyond just the file and folder, and especially with the AI tools available, be able to think in things in a semantic or federated way. But again, on short turnaround productions, that's a luxury that is just not available.
So let me follow up on that, Matt. What does a real source of truth look like in practice, and what are some of the patterns that pretend to solve it but don't actually scale, aside from the folder and file structure?
Well, in practice, it looks like a database full of metadata and then a file structure that has the original files. Um, there are systems where that stuff all tries to do it in one place, but what we find to be really helpful is, say, for example, having a MAM database with rich metadata pointing to a rich file system that could be tiered from S3 and LTO to a nearline to an online, so that there's sort of accurate representation of where the original, back to that high res question, there's an accurate representation of access to the high res so that I can access the appropriate high res for my role. Say, for example, that stuff's been archived off the LTO and wiped off of primary storage. I may not want to bring it back from LTO if I can bring it back from a tier 2 or a nearline. If it's not on nearline and not on, and it's only living on an S3 bucket or an LTO tape, you want to be able to make good decisions about that. I always sort of joke, the pain of archiving is not archiving, it's restoring, right? You want to be able to make that process as quick and cost effective, especially in the cloud world. You want to make that as quick and as cost effective as possible.
That brings up a really good point. And it takes us to our next topic is centralized infrastructure for distributed teams. So Danielle, ITV centralized post-production into a new headquarters in Connecticut. What problem were you ultimately trying to solve by consolidating finishing, storage, and post infrastructure into one location?
Well, we actually have two main locations. So Connecticut is our headquarters and Los Angeles is our other main location. They're connected through an NPLS. So essentially, when we moved from New York City to Connecticut, we moved all of our facilities to Connecticut. And within that facility, we are able to do offline, online. We have a Dolby Atmos room. We're able to do everything all under one roof, and we are able to keep it within our firewall. So from a content security standpoint, when you're working with streamers, like everything is about content security. And when you're working on competition series, whether that's Hell's Kitchen or Love Island or any of the competition series that we work on, we want to make sure we want to make sure that we have our content secured behind our firewall. So we're essentially keeping everything in one of our two hubs, and we have a secure, transport between the two. And that's really the way that we've been able to hire an executive producer in LA and an editor in New Jersey. And they basically will pop into one of our facilities and ride across the MPLS and be able to access the media in one of the two locations.
Outstanding. Thank you for digging into that a little bit. Matt, corporate teams often don't build facilities at the same scale, right? So how do they achieve the similar outcomes using hybrid or cloud-enabled approaches?
Yeah, we've seen quite a few folks using tools like Suite Studio and LucidLink for things like that. We do see people remote in with, the Teradicis, if you will, and Jump desktops of the world. So there's sort of multiple ways to do that. Typically, corporate networks are not big fans of having big media flowing over their house networks. That does happen, but generally speaking, we found that sort of those block forwarding tools like Suite and LucidLink are really, really popular in the corporate crowd. They're really particularly well adapted freelancers as well. But it does open different sort of security protocols. It does make permissioning around those file structures different. And you do find yourself with potentially duplicating files onto those storage devices for short term. In managing the flow of data, say on and off primary tiers onto those sort of cache or block forwarding tools is really important. And that's where asset management, for example, can help automate that process. So that stuff, say after 90 days gets deleted, or users after they've completed their work, if they're freelancers, get removed from the distribution list. So we see that pretty common. But again, like I said, it depends on the organization. Some companies have really robust networks, and being able to remote into just a machine remotely and use a PC over IP tools is really effective. But we're seeing a kind of a mix depending on the type of work too. There's definitely different levels of sort of production requirements, and people finishing in 8K or higher or in HDR, even those PC over IP tools aren't super great. So it depends on the workflow.
I'm glad you mentioned the freelancers and folks remoting in, because I want to jump into talking about remote editing and being able to scale with freelancers. So Danielle, even with a centralized headquarters, remote editing is still part of the workflow, I'd imagine. What makes remote editing successful at scale versus frustrating for your teams?
For us, again, it's first and foremost security. So we have VPNs, single sign-on, two-factor authentication. People have to remote into our system. And I think we were doing remote editing before COVID just to try it out. And obviously we thought we'd all be on a beach somewhere, but that didn't work out. So ultimately when COVID happened, we just scaled up with HP RGS at the time. We've now moved to the HP Anywhere software, and that has been really reliable and really, really great. And then we've basically, with that, we found that to be the most reliable program for people to remote in. And now we can like monitor their connectivity better and just make sure that it's a positive experience for everyone. We have a team that onboards everyone individually because every single person's home setup is different. That has been the major shift, is that one-to-one care that we need to do, and filling in, like, we'll send out a Google form or a Jot form and say, tell us what your home internet is like. And, what are you using? How many monitors? What's your display size? Because we've now, over the last few years, 5 years, I guess, I've figured out that all these little things matter. So, for us, it's just kind of paying attention to that stuff and figuring out, what works, what doesn't work, and just listening to the people at home. And like, usually if there's a problem that persists, it is a problem. But again, it can also be someone's home internet. So it's tricky to navigate.
Matt, freelancers are a major factor in a lot of the corporate creative teams that you work with. What kind of separates organizations that scale freelancers smoothly from those that kind of struggle constantly? What kinds of things are they doing that's different?
I think, Danielle, you sort of touched on it. It really is about security, right? So it depends on the type of customer, but I have a customer with 490 creative users across, 24 countries, and most of them are freelancers. So there's a tremendous amount of effort into orchestrating the single sign-on, orchestrating where projects live and how those projects are accessed and what tools they're accessed with. Um, so it definitely depends, but we're seeing an increased sort of focus, if you will, on security, because people realize that this content is valuable and this content is often created before products are seen, whether that product be the actual content itself or whether that content is about a product that's soon to come out. So there's a lot of scrutiny and security over the content. And there's a lot of tools to do that, but it takes an investment, not just in time, but in technology.
And that kind of takes us to the next segment where we talk about review and approval and bottlenecks. There's a lot of different flavors, a lot of different ways to do review and approve. And I'm curious, Danielle, even when editing is moving quickly, which it obviously is with some of the projects you're working on, where do you most often see workflows slow down in distributed teams when it comes to review and approval workflows?
I think the big thing is communication. And we realized that in COVID, and, we did Love Island season 2 was the peak of COVID, and we couldn't even be in the same room as people we needed to collaborate with. And that was a real challenge. And I think it comes down to communication. We have kind of a set, group of channels that we communicate, whether that's Slack or WhatsApp or Google Chat, depending on the show. And we just set that up ahead of time. And we kind of hold people to that communication, because ultimately, whether that's support or, something's running late or the shoot's going long and we need to get that footage in, or we need to rush a card in, or the bag audio is not ready yet, whatever that is, that comes down to communication. So, to me, when things start to go haywire or slow down, it's because people haven't communicated. I don't know if that's what you're looking for there. It's not a very technical answer, but the humans are definitely a big part of this and have to make it work. And I think getting people to buy into the remote workflow, I think we've seen it a lot over the last few years, with people being able to work at home and have dinner with their families and be able to edit. But it's like, you have to have that at every level, because if at the top level of your production, people aren't communicating and they don't know how to work with a distributed team, it all starts to fall apart at that point.
Matt, from a systems perspective, what is the biggest improvement corporate teams can make to speed up the review and approve process across multiple locations as well as departments?
Yeah, using formal tools. So one of the common things we see is people do link sharing and then they'll send an email. So then the creative needs to look at the link. Okay, this is what they saw. Okay, let me go look at the email. And suddenly the information they need to make creative decisions is in 2 or 3 places. When you use more formal review and approval tools, the comments can be right in there. They can just type right in there. Some of them even have telestrators and things right in there, so they could circle and draw on the content. So to me, it's to really sort of streamline that process. It also leaves a crumb trail. So these asset management tools will show you, give you a copy of every link you've ever shared, and then you can see every person that's ever downloaded or looked at everything. That sort of crumb trail to the usage of those share links, who's downloaded it, who's commented, who they can even comment on in time, but we can create markers. So to me, not only does that sort of streamline the communication and keep that in the same sort of sandbox, but it also creates a crumb trail back to the permissioning, right? So suddenly you have the ability to have an audit trail, if you will, of the content and see how it's been used and who's been accessing it.
A discussion I have quite a bit with clients is when should review and approve be synchronous versus asynchronous, right? When is review and approve done in real time where everyone's on the same call, looking at the same video, versus the kind of push-pull asynchronous methodology of sending it to someone, they watch it at their leisure or in their time zone and then leave the notes, and then the editor has to then translate those notes. So Danielle, if we could start with you, where do you kind of draw the line as to what needs to be synchronous and what needs to be asynchronous for review and approve?
It depends on the production, and ultimately there are pros and cons to both, right? We do find that when it's asynchronous, everything takes longer and you're getting pages of notes, and something as simple, especially in a color correct, if you're sending a link out and make this a little more green or a little less green, it's subjective, right? And so if you're in the session and you can show the producer or the EP what it looks like, it goes a lot smoother. So we do use tools like Clearview and some other tools to do the synchronous screenings. For a show like Love Island, we have to do that like in real time because of editing time and how that show works. But there are pros and cons to both, and I think that depending on the show, we will usually, the EP or the network will guide us in terms of like how we want to go about that. And then we have a variety of tools, whether that is, again, Clearview, Evercast, SRT tools built in, Frame.io, Media Silo, you name it, Pix, whatever it is, because we're providing content to several different networks. So depending on their security provisions and needs, we may have to do it differently.
And Matt, what mistakes are you seeing organizations make consistently when they're designing hybrid or multi-site creative workflows?
I think they're underestimating a few things, right? They're underestimating the power of metadata. And I joke at this, but it is really true. There's kind of two kinds of metadata. There's fact and fiction. And the fact one is pretty easy. That's the technical metadata. But the fiction one is actually really important. It's like people's, if a good, bad, or ugly is what I like to say, is a piece of content good, bad, or ugly. And sometimes that's a value judgment or a taste, but that's really, really important. And I think creatives are often maybe forget that they're not valued, but they're often paid maybe for their taste. So good creatives bring that taste every day, and their taste is really important to their job. They can take a pile of content, make a bunch of choices about what's good, bad, and ugly, and generate content that meets the mark, achieves the goals, or is creative or funny or engaging. So I think people underestimate that. They underestimate the power of metadata and the value that human beings bring, and that value oftentimes is not just technical chops, but that creative sort of that ability to define that fiction and define what good content looks like. To take a bunch of raw content, jump it on a timeline and make something meaningful, tell a story, right, is really a valuable asset, and one I think is often underestimated or underappreciated sometimes in the corporate market.
Matt, if you're looking ahead, what technology or trends should creative leaders be paying closer attention to if they want their multi-site creative teams to scale without burning out?
Gosh, networking, right? Networking to me is really, really important. Understanding what networks are available to you and what they're capable of doing. And I think that sort of leads into what Danielle was talking about, is like, what tools do people use to communicate? That's gonna be huge. And it's interesting. I actually often ask customers, well, how do you prefer to communicate? Would you rather be on Slack? Would you rather be on Teams? You want to do this via email? We'll do smoke signal, carrier pigeon, whatever it takes, right? So I think how you communicate and what those networks look like is really important.
And Danielle, that's the same question of you. What kind of technology or trends should creative leaders be paying closer attention to if they want their multi-site teams to scale out again without being burnt out?
I mean, I really think this is where we can lean into AI and help productivity and help burnout, whether that is sifting through emails to find that little nugget that you had a conversation about 2 months ago and you can't remember, all the way to like automating certain tasks that are just mundane tasks. And how do we take the time that we were spending doing those mundane tasks and putting that time and energy into the creative? And that's really, that's our goal, is how do we support that? And so to me, the productivity side of AI, or the metadata and the tagging and the capabilities of being able to search and find, we have 25 seasons or 24 seasons of Hell's Kitchen, going back and finding something that's easy to find now with a few clicks of a button is pretty amazing, and saves a ton of time. But also it's like, now we can put that into like, what do we make of this now? And that's just one example, but I think a lot of people have like massive libraries and a lot of content, a lot of information, and I think we're burned out by having to sift through all of that as humans, and it's coming at us in so many different ways. So how do we use AI and technology to help kind of cut out the noise and focus on the creative part of our brains?
Well, Matt and Danielle, thank you so much for being here and answering my questions. What we're going to do now is pause, because we're going to go into the live Q&A section where we're going to take some questions from the audience and put you two both in the hot seat. So can you sit still for a few more minutes?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking around and watching that fantastic episode. I hope those key considerations kind of resonate with you. Feel free to reach out and we can give you a PDF. You can share it with your team. But today we have both Danielle and Matt Stamos, who were on the interview that you just saw, to answer your questions live. And there's been no shortage of them. We've got them coming on various social networks, as well as in the YouTube chat if you're not already there. So I thought we would start with the questions that we're getting in our YouTube chat. So one of the first ones is from Paul. Paul, good to see you. Paul's asking, Danielle, are you using any specific search tools with the shows you're working on, like ScriptSync or maybe a phonetics database?
Yeah, I think, when we're working within Avid, we're using ScriptSync, obviously. And then if we're working in Premiere on some of our shows, we'll use the native search functionality within Premiere. And so we're using whatever's available and still testing out new plugins and tools and panels in both of those NLEs.
And that kind of dovetails into another question, a broader question, which I'm sure we could talk for an hour on. But how would you say AI is playing a role in the shows you do? Is AI replacing the creative pros, or is it just adding perspective and tastes to the metadata that it generates?
I think right now we're not really integrating AI unless it's natively in Avid or Premiere Pro in terms of search functionality. And we are doing a lot of testing. There's so many products and so many tools on the market. Every day there's something new coming out. And really the goal is how do we focus on the mundane tasks at the moment so that the creatives can continue to be creative? Our job is to just support the creatives and support the shows. But obviously there's so many things out there and there's really deep metadata and visual search. And, I think in the end, it will change how we edit and how we operate. We're just not there yet. And we're sort of dipping our toe in the water and doing some testing, but it really needs to be in partnership with whatever network or client that we're producing a show for.
And I presume that last point you brought up was because of the potential legal ramifications, which are kind of still being worked out in the court of law. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very complicated and it's moving so fast. I don't think any of us that have been in this industry for, 30, 40 years have seen technology move at this pace. And I don't even think we can comprehend how fast the climate is changing. I made a joke in an email yesterday that I was like, by the time I wrote this email, there's been 10 new tools that have been developed. And it is hard to keep up. And I think it's even harder for lawyers, both at networks and streamers and within our own company, to keep up with the terms and conditions and everything. The other thing is that a lot of the free tools don't have the right protections for IP and copyright and indemnity. So we're really having to dig deep and then, get into the enterprise accounts and bigger agreements. So there is a cost associated with it as well. But, we have an AI committee, and we are definitely digging in and seeing where it's useful. I think if anything, we have a lot more creatives coming to us saying, hey, we want to use AI. Can we? And we're going, wait, hold a beat. We need to check with legal and our AI committee and the network. And it's a bit of a process at the moment. I'm hoping that gets more streamlined as these tools become they're here, they're mainstream at the moment, but in terms of how we can use them with content and protecting our content and IP, I think we still need to, as a industry, kind of get that a bit more streamlined.
And Matt, are you kind of seeing the same thing in your day-to-day work, or is there kind of a different perspective in some of the clients you've been working with?
I think there's a different perspective based on the client, right? So what I'm seeing is there's everyone's hybrid. It's just about how much is on-prem, how much is in the cloud. And I'm seeing kind of a line in the sand between sort of that semantic and federated search versus the sort of technical factual search. So there's almost two different types of searches going on now. And those two things have not really, the AI really hasn't gelled those things together where there isn't like one search interface that does both really well. So it kind of depends a little bit on the customer's profile, what their content profile is, in order to find sort of a happy medium.
We have another question from chat, which Danielle, I think you're exquisitely positioned to address, is that in Avid workflows on fast turnarounds like Love Island, has the offline to online process changed in the past few years?
Well, for that show in particular, there is no offline to online process. We just don't have time. So I think when you're getting into fast turnaround, depending on what that turnaround is, depending on the network, depending on where you are, for us, it's always been, we're just editing in full res. I think if anything, the technology and the computers have gotten better and more compact to be able to ship them across, to another country and edit there. So that to me is like, we have to just stay full res. But I think when you're getting into UHD and QuickTurn, that's a different story. And that's where, I do think that we've done a lot with Resolve and round tripping in terms of like UHD and HDR, in terms of making proxies and stuff. So just figuring out how to do a QuickTurn in UHD. We have not done that yet. But my guess is we would have to find some happy medium in terms of an edit proxy.
When you are working on the shows that do have the timetable to allow for offline and online workflows, are you finding that the conform process is still being handled by an AE, or have we found the kind of jobs have shrunk a little bit while now the colorist also has to do the conform as well?
We're definitely still doing that with AEs. It depends on the show. When we have a big reality show where there's, 60, 80, 100 cameras, you're not recording all of those. And so we'll typically partner with someone to record everything into Avid Media from the get-go, and we'll make low res and high res media. There's several vendors that do that, but we have some good partners that we've worked with. And then the AEs will sync and group and do what they need to do. So you're kind of you're starting post in the field versus waiting for it on some of those bigger shows. And typically the smaller run and gun, we're just bringing the cards back, where we're media managing in the field and bringing those cards back. We've done a lot with like file transfers and uploads. We haven't fully gotten to the point of putting all of that in the cloud, mainly due to cost, and ability, depending on where the field is located, depending on the internet. But in general, we're still working with AEs doing, the conform. And then I will say that I feel like the process to online has gotten better with some of our learnings, but I think that's because our team has really tried to dial that in and support the shows, and we do centrally manage everything, which then helps us apply knowledge from one show to the next in regards to learnings.
Outstanding. This wouldn't be a Key Code podcast if we didn't talk about tech. So I'll open this up to both of you. We have a DIT and post supervisor in the chat that's asking about what kind of NASs, and I'm going to augment the question a little bit, what type of NASs or SANs do you recommend for post-production? This DIT and post supervisor specializes in projects on a smaller scale, but with maybe half a dozen editors on-prem and then a few remote via LucidLink. What kind of NASs or SANs would you recommend for workflows like this?
I can chime in on that. I kind of see a lot of people using different types of storage for different types of purposes. And when you talk about a NAS, a lot of times that's to me on a LAN, right? What does that look like to a remote editor? If that remote editor is on their own compute, if they've got a high horsepower machine, it's usually not practical for them to access the NAS over a VPN or just remotely in general. What I've found is a lot of customers are using tools like Suite Studio and LucidLink to fill that gap. So that NAS just serves the LAN local users, and then files move off and on that NAS onto a cache storage device like a Suite or a Lucid. And the key there is just minimizing the footprint. Those products are not inexpensive, I'll say. So the real trick there is minimizing that footprint and only putting on those devices or that service, I guess you could say, what's in progress, the WIP storage, right? So if it's stuff that's in a timeline, then it'll sit on the Suite Studio or the LucidLink. But if it's not in a timeline, you age it off and it sits on the NAS. If you are going to access a NAS remotely, kind of, Danielle, you sort of mentioned it. It's like, what does that internet connection look like? If you're in a hotel somewhere, it's probably not going to work. If you're at home on a wired connection on a decent broadband, it should be fine. So to me, it's the connectivity is really, really challenging. And we work with some international customers, and it varies country to country, right? And in the United States, it can vary region to region, user to user. So that connectivity ends up being something where it's funny. I say this to customers all the time. Who's the problem child? Who's the one with the struggling internet connection? Let's start with them, because they're usually the ones that, sort of the lowest common denominator. If you can get them to work, then the other folks with faster, more modern connections usually will be fine.
And Danielle, I can pretty much guess what the answer is going to be, but what kind of shared storage solutions are you using for your various shows that you're working on?
We really, have had for years just the traditional Nexus storage, Dell Isilon. I feel like that's the old name for it, but and we've had some other kind of tier 2 storage, whether that is a FreeNAS or something. And so we're really looking in the next year or two to reduce that footprint. And so a little bit different than Matt's experiences, we do have a lot of footage, a lot of big files, and it just like production, you can't always tell when things are going to happen at the same time. So you can go, we're not in the field on anything, and then all of a sudden we've got 3 big shows and we need to get that media in and saved and backed up. And we used to push it to LTO, and now we're backing up to Deep Glacier just for DR purposes. So if anything, it's landing, and then we're pushing it as a DR, and we kind of keep stuff a bit longer because of that offline online workflow that we have. And then we are looking at new storage that's coming out that can handle a bit more, whether that's with Avid or Premiere, in terms of all of the automation and tools that are built into the NLEs and being able to kind of move media faster. So it's a work in progress, but I think in general, we still have a lot of the bigger traditional storage on-prem for the moment, but we're trying to reduce that.
Yeah, let me expand on that really quick, because you brought up something I think is important. A NAS to me is a single piece of the storage puzzle. And there's lots of really good NAS vendors out there, but from a data protection standpoint, what the common rule of a 3-2-1, 3 copies of my data, 2 different storage devices and 1 off-site, that I would kind of start there and work my way back, because that really is the key. That's one of the keys to sort of having an overall data protection policy. And just having cloud storage gives you that 1 off-site, and it gives you that second storage type. So it really, the cloud in that sense is super great, but LTO does that as well. It's more cost effective than the cloud. But to me, that should be part of that NAS discussion as well.
Well, and the reason we keep so much on-prem is because we've been doing remote editorial since before COVID, and really the most secure thing is to have people VPNing into our facility
Yeah.
and behind our firewall. And so I think, really we have to then control where that is going in what part of the cloud and private or public, in terms of the content protection side of things. So we just want to try to lock that down from a content security standpoint.
Well, and that's an easier thing to permission. So the other thing about that is storage and permissions is part of the same discussion. And if someone's remoting into a compute machine, it's way easier to manage those permissions than have the files leave the house, right? So
Yeah. I mean, back in the day, many years ago, you can copy to a hard drive and then copy and then share the bins. And we're just, we didn't do that. And I think when COVID first happened, a lot of people were buying hard drives to do that. And we were like, no, we don't want media in 10 different editors' homes, not for anything other than we don't know where our media is, and it shouldn't be in that many different places unprotected.
Danielle, have you worked at all with Sony C Media Cloud? And there's a lot of things Sony C can do, but utilizing it for being able to shoot in the field and then upload directly from the camera into the Sony C Media Cloud. Have you have any experience with that?
I have not. We've demoed it. We've spoken with Sony. I believe some of my colleagues in the UK have been working with Sony C, and I've seen some of the interface and the things that it can do, and looks pretty great.
There used to be an old joke in the industry, which is no one got fired for buying Sony. And there's plenty of facilities that have standardized on Sony. They've got Sony cameras. Why not use Sony C? I know I've worked with the NHRA, and the NHRA uploads directly to Sony C from the tracks for their editors to then edit in the cloud. So there is definitely folks using it. I think it's examining the cost structure, because whenever you're doing something in the cloud, it's based on users and then tiers of storage and redundancy and different regions. So it certainly works. It's just you really got to investigate the costs associated with it.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's like the cost, the egress, how many pings, it just starts to add up, and it becomes, I think, harder when you have unscripted television with so many people. I mean, we have teams of 60, 80, 100 people on a show. It starts to get unruly a little bit if you start to get dinged with costs with that many people.
I absolutely love this next question, and Danielle, it's for you. And it's, do you find yourself hiring more creatives or engineers now that we have all these different remote workflows?
That's interesting. I guess I feel like it's been hard to hire quote unquote engineers or people that are technical in post-production for a while now. We have Scott Thompson on our team is fantastic, and he was at Postworks for years. And I was his client at Postworks many years ago. And I think we've really just had much more luck training people up in terms of our support staff, where we find people, we've kind of plucked a few people from shows and we said, you've actually been really helpful in our troubleshooting on the show. Do you want to be part of our tech team? And we have someone on our team who's like, really? I don't know anything. I'm like, we'll teach you. And now they're like one of our best techs. So I guess the answer is, I don't know if from our perspective of purely post-production, we're not talking about video engineers and, running cables in the field. We hire people for that. I think we've just, had better luck training eager, interested people who want to get in there and learn. And I think that's only going to become more of a mandate for us across the board, whether that is post-production or IT, because you just, at this point, again, everything's changing so fast, and you just kind of have to be able to watch the news, check the news outlets or the, whatever the latest is, and tinker, and then bring that idea back to the table to try to make things better.
And with that, that's all that we have time for today. Danielle and Matt, thank you so much for joining us both at the interview and being on the hot seat with live Q&A. I do want to remind everyone that if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Keycode Media on your favorite social media channels. And if you're looking to build or upgrade your production workflow, Keycode Media delivers the most competitive pricing plus a free consultation to ensure your workflow is built right, the first time. And you can book your first consultation today at keycodemedia.com. As always, thanks for listening and watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Broadcast to Post. Thanks for watching Broadcast to Post. Don't forget to follow KeyCode Media on social and contact us about your projects at keycodemedia.com.